Oh, it does inform who he was, and his art was definitely informed by growing up in a brothel. His grandmother was a madam, and his mother was a prostitute, hoe, and daddy was a pimp, and so many of his uncles were as well. Richard's full name is Richard Franklin Lennox Thomas Pryor. Thomas was his mother's maiden name, but the other names are a couple of his uncles who were also working in the hoe house, in the brothel. I think it was the paradox of that kind of growing up is that as painful as that was and could have been and certainly was, that you also get, you get great humor from there and the great characters. And so it was a blessing and a curse. Well, that's so interesting. And that's why I love this documentary and why I think, such a great job was done here, because it really shows the arc of his life in that and the evolution of his art, which is fascinating in itself. I mean, he was doing that brand of comedy, the Bill Cosby Oreo cookie stuff, very white bread, very, unoffensive, very, very gentle with all the white audiences in Vegas. And, he looked at Bill as a model, a template for himself. And I can do that. And he did it very well. And it did get him gigs in Vegas, but he couldn't do it anymore. He told me one day he was looking out at the sea of white people and he saw Dean Martin's face. And Dean was looking at him sort of quizzically. And Richard really said to himself, what the am I doing here? And walked off stage and then went to Berkeley and hung out with Black intellectuals and people with big ideas who were doing things, Black Panthers, poets and writers and other artists. And they all looked at Richard, like Ishmael Reed was saying that you got to be you, dude. What are you bringing to the party other than, this straight white comedy? I mean, you got to do you. And when he started doing Richard, that's when he found Richard Pryor, as we know and love today, that brand of comedy, which was the fire brand, no pun intended. That was the angry predator stalking the stage and talking about race and topics that really, I mean, he ripped the covers off Black people as well as white people. He talked about race in America that was never discussed and his own anger about it. And it was a revelation, and it really changed creative culture. Well, I think that even though a lot of people were saying you can't do this, I mean, remember when he was saying that everyone's telling me I can't do this, I can't do that, but he couldn't do it's you can't be someone you're not. He couldn't not deny himself any longer. And those around him who supported him, I mean, he did have support. He had a good support system. He had some good managers and people who were really rooting him on. And the NBC show wasn't canceled. He walked off. Yeah, because of censorship. And as he said in that clip, you can't do when people keep telling you can't do this, you can't do that. What's the point, right? But he still broke through. And the way he broke through was by doing stand-up. I mean, that's how he really, especially live in concert, that was his big breakthrough moment into the white audience, to really cross over, as they say, cross over into a big, wide field. So I met Richard through a friend of mine, Lucy Soroyan, who was working for Richard on the NBC variety show. She was also kind of dating him, and she said, look, Richard bought this house in Northridge. It's a big house. He wants me to help decorate him, but I need help. Can you help me? And I arrived back from Texas, actually, dusty and broke. And I need a gig. Yeah, that'll be perfect. And I never decorated a house. I knew I had good taste. That's all. But, sure. So August 22nd, 1977, I drove out to Northridge and I met Richard. And my first impression of Richard was just complete vulnerability. Somebody and I was just so taken the second I met him. And I think it was the same. I have that wonderful photograph. It's in the film of the first meeting. I've got it's a bouquet of flowers and Richard's leaning in and I look like the cat who saw the canary. But I had to watch Richard and observe his life. Every day I'd show up for work and the women were coming and going and I'm like, oh, didn't bother me. I'm like, this is an interesting guy. But we got to know each other, which is a lesson for all women. Don't get in bed with somebody at jump, wait and get to know somebody. It really matters. It does. So we got to know each other. And people say, well, weren't you like warned by some of the behavior? He got married. He went through so much during those 6 months that I was observing and working for him. The Hollywood Bowl incident, NBC shows. Then he quit and walked off. I mean, so much was going on in his life. And then he shot the car, and then ended that marriage, which I think sometimes he got married to end marriages.